First of all, welcome and thank you all for being on the call. And thank you for reading the book. And thank you, Caitlin, for being our Zoom master. Caitlin, if you could just screen share the first page, I wanted to kind of go over real quick, like an outline for our hour together. Thank you, Caitlin. So first, I want to get a smattering of comments to think of what people thought of this book, and just people who liked it, what they liked about it, people who did not like it, what they did not like about it, people who absolutely loved it, what they absolutely loved about it, what they hated, if they hated it, why they hated it, okay? Then I want to take a look at kind of 3 vignettes in the book that I found anyway myself just so evocative. One is the flashback when she's driving with her second husband, David, to a family simcha of his in Pennsylvania, and she flashbacks to when she was young and in love with William, and they were driving in the cold and in the snow, and she felt at home. She's in the opposite of home. She's in a state she's never been on a dark, cold, snowy night, but she was at home because she was with him. And that was such an interesting orientation. Then at the very end, the whole museum light epiphany, when she talks about she was sustained by a myth and then realizes that what was true of the museum, that its light was a myth, was also true of William. And yet she decides she doesn't want to let him know, or she wants to protect herself from that as well. Want to talk about that. And then for contrast's sake, because meaning is always found in contrast, I want to look at the scene where she falls in love with and marries David, her second husband, for contrast's sake. And then at the very end, want to talk about, seek your takeaways and suggest some takeaways. Okay, so that is our game plan. And Caitlin will go back to the full screen. And just in the interest of being able to fulfill all that agenda, why don't I ask if I'd love to get, let's say, 5 comments on just general reactions to the book. And if you could put in the chat function to Caitlin that you would like to share, Caitlin will let me know and I'll see it as well. And we'll just take the first 5 comments of people who want to share. So just put your desire to share your general reaction, good, bad, or indifferent to the book, and in the chat function, and we'll get a smattering of reactions. Okay, Lori Pollinger would love to hear what you thought about the book.
I love the book because of the complexity that it shows of between couples, and how we can mirror one another, and how we can see more easily something in another person that really we hold within ourselves. There's a lot of complementarity.
Yeah, so both the complexity element and also the mirror element. How did you see the mirror element play out in the book, Lori?
Well, I think that when she sometimes would identify traits in her husband that she was going to initially, that she was faulting, she would later come to see that those were also some things that were part of herself, so that she behaved in those ways. Right.
A lot of layers, a lot of complexity. Thank you. Sarah Stone. If you can unmute, please. Sarah, if you can, you were prepared to share, if you could share what you wanted to say.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to say anything.
Okay, good. Okay.
I was trying to get on. I'm just getting on.
Okay, good enough. So what I think I'm going to do is, Susan was kind enough to share in advance of the class as well. What I think I'm going to do is jump into the first vignette, which is so evocative of a lot of the basic themes. So, Caitlin, if you can screen share page 1 of the book, of my handout, and page 1 and then page 2. Okay, so I just love this. A few years before David died, we went to Pennsylvania for his nephew's marriage. David had been raised a Hasidic Jew right outside of Chicago, and he had left that community when he was 19. They ostracized him then. He had no contact with any of his family until just recently when his sister got in touch with him. So I did not know her well. She seemed a stranger to me because she was. We went on the train, and then his sister picked us up, and we drove through the dark for half an hour to a hotel in the middle of nowhere. It had snowed the night before, and I sat in the back seat and stared out the window at all the darkness going by. The rare house could be seen, and every so often various stores, one with a sign on it that said going out of business forever, or storage looking places, and my heart was so heavy. So she's with David. She's with David for a family simcha, and her heart is heavy. Why? Flashback. Because it all made me think of William and how when we were young and I was in college, we would drive through the night from Chicago back east to see his mother, and we drove through places like this, snowy areas that looked forlorn. But I felt so happy with him. I felt snug with him. William had no siblings, as I have said, and in a way at that point, neither did I. And there was that night as I drove with my current husband and his sister, a strong memory of coziness because William and I had been a world unto ourselves. And I remembered one drive back east when he had said I could throw my peach pit out of the window, and I had thrown it out his window for some reason. He was driving and the peach pit hit him in the face. And I remember we laughed and laughed as if it were the funniest thing that had ever happened. And then also a few years later, we would drive to Newton, Mass to see his mother with our baby girls tucked into their car seats. And there was still that sense of coziness. But that night in the backseat of the car, as we passed the snowy acres of land, and I sort of heard my husband and his sister speaking quietly of their childhood, passing by billboards that said, hit by a car, call HHR. I thought to myself, William is the only person I ever felt safe with. He is the only home I ever had. So, Caitlin, if we can come back to the full screen. I'd love people's response to that. What do you think of that little vignette? They're in the middle of nowhere. It's cold, it's dark, it's snowy, and she feels snug. And she feels at home in the middle of nowhere. And she feels safe when they're in the middle of nowhere. And it's with William. What do you think of that? And by the way, she's actually, when she's having that flashback, she's actually going to David's simcha, his nephew's marriage, but she's still thinking about William. Please comment, anybody. And again, feel free to indicate your desire to comment in the chat if anyone wishes to. Okay, Judy Taub.
Well, I think that she was just at such a different place in her life when she was doing that drive with David. I mean, when she was with William, you know, she was so young and so naive and so raw, and she had been through so much already by the time she met David. So, you know, that coziness that she felt with William, you know, I don't know that she would have ever felt with anyone else because of where she was when she was with William.
Who's speaking?
Okay, so Judy, let me just explore that with you. I mean, she is remembering this in the current moment about how she felt as a younger, you know, as a younger partner in this relationship. But then in the present tense, she says, William is the only person I ever felt safe with. He is the only home I ever had. And here's what I want to ask. And it's just, to me, this is part of the richness of the book. I mean, I would not want my daughter to marry William. I would not want my daughter to marry William. He was a serial cheater. He was a serial cheater. He cheated on her serially. And then, you know, of course, he was cheated on. And then, of course, she cheated on him. And it was just a hot mess of unfaithfulness and lack of faithfulness he was so unworthy of all those words, snug, safe, home. What do you make of that? And yet, in the present tense, she still remembers that. Chaya, and then Susan.
Higher?
Thank you. I was trying to unmute. I think that when William became her partner, she came from a beyond measurable background.
Yes.
He represented to her a different place in the social hierarchy. He exuded confidence. At that phase, it did not feel what to me seemed more and more evident throughout the book, that he was either incapable or totally unwilling to really attach to anybody in a meaningful way.
Right.
At the beginning of the relationship, it was like the two of them were a charmed circle, whether they drove at night to visit his mother. His mother was always on the outside. And even though she was solicitous, she got her the wrong clothes, offered the wrong food, somehow always make her feel a little gauche. And William gave her the feeling that she is worthy of him, and by extension, worthy of herself. She chose David because he embodied the exact opposite emotional makeup. But when they are sitting in the car, she feels excluded because the two siblings all of a sudden rediscover their commonality. And she's not only physically sitting in the back seat, but she is not even drawn into the conversation. So the darkness outside mirrors her internal darkness and diminishing worthiness.
Okay, and I love that read about feeling excluded, but I'm wondering now at the end, we're going to see in the next piece, she realizes that she was sustained by a myth, to use her own language, and that in fact she was not safe with him, and in fact he wasn't really a home, and in fact he was a cheater, and in fact there was nobody in the museum, and in fact he was unworthy of that. It just the complexity of feeling that and then realizing it wasn't so. Let me add, Susan Miron, your hand was up.
To me, so much of this book was about characters who had really traumatic childhoods, who did not at all get over these childhoods and the horrors embodied in these childhoods. And at one point, I think she wrote or said, we were like Hansel and Gretel.
Right.
So if they're like Hansel and Gretel going through a dark forest, how apropos is it that they're going through a dark area, you know, going to this simcha, as you know, and she's remembering Hansel. He made her feel safe. It may have been an illusion, but it worked for a very long time.
Right, and she didn't want to give it up.
Yeah.
Michael Gardner.
I hesitate to join in this because I recognize that I'm an emotional barbarian. But I was very, very fortunate to be raised by two parents who I was an only child, so that probably affected things, who just adored me. I felt adored from my earliest memory until my parents passed. But, what that always told me is I've never really understood or appreciated people who have these complex marriages where they have 1,000 different emotions going on. To me, the solution was real simple. You find the absolute sweetest person you can, and you marry them. And that's going to mean you're going to feel great. You're going to feel great about yourself. You're going to feel great about them. And I mean, there have to be other qualities too, to be sure. But emotional baggage and complexity and, constantly replaying high school, I never found it appealing. It bored me, and I think it's a formula for failure. I do appreciate, and I think the book makes clear that it's a real leg up in the emotional world to have a set of parents who really adore you, and I'm forever grateful for that. But I think the solutions to a wonderful life are laying right out there before you. I think who you marry is the most important decision you'll ever make in your life. And and you should find the person who is just the sweetest, most loving person you can find. And you're going to have a great life.
Yeah, so Michael, thank you for that. I wonder whether one of the points that she's making in this book is that in many ways, children are deeply shaped by their parents' examples in ways that are good and bad. After all, William was a cheater and a serial cheater. And it turns out that his mother, walked out on her first husband, right? Clyde Trask, the potato farmer. She quote unquote fell in love with the German prisoner of war. On one day she listens to him play the piano and just falls in love and leaves her husband and abandons his daughter. And then of course, William became a very unreliable partner, the kind you do not want your daughter to marry. And Lucy Barton's marriage, as others have mentioned in this call, she came from a tremendously challenged home and a tremendously problematic father and mother, etc. I'm wondering whether that simple view that you just articulated, find somebody you love and be faithful forever, is maybe much more available if you see that in your own parents, and much harder to achieve if they role model the opposite. I guess my question, yeah.
I agree with that. But the example of my parents, both my parents came from difficult homes. And one of the things I always admired about them was that coming from difficult homes, they nevertheless created a real loving home. So I recognize it's a great leg up, but I think, I don't know, it just seems so clear to me. I realize the difficulty if you don't have that benefit, and I appreciate what you've said. But also, my parents both came from very difficult homes,
Right.
and overcame all of that.
Yeah. Just last thing, and then I'll call on Tamar Knopf and then Jim Mnookin. If you and your spouse can role model faithfulness through the years, that is an inestimable gift that you give your kids, because they believe in the possibility of love through the years. And if what you've role modeled is, he cheats, she cheats, he cheats, she cheats, she cheats, he cheats, then it makes the notion of getting married. I mean, when I work with couples, I do several sessions on how can you think now about a marriage that is going to last 50 to 60 years and beyond. You're getting married for the next 60 years and beyond, a faithful love. And if that's not in any model of what you see, it's just very hard to live that. Anyway, thank you. I think, let me just get to I know Steve Bookbinder is up there, and also Tamar Knopf, and then Jim, and then Steve. Tamar. Tamar, if you can unmute, please.
Hi, I didn't even think it was about faithfulness so much as I thought it was about that first line from Anna Karenina. Every family, every happy family,
Right.
Everybody has a story. Some of us are lucky to have really happy stories, and some people are not so lucky. And she repeatedly said, of the things that happen in that house, I will never talk about it. Okay. And so she had her own story, and it wasn't just so much about faithfulness. It was about love. And clearly she hadn't been loved. And clearly she had not been taken care of, maybe in the way that he was, but then come to find out that his mother had not taken care of him that way. So every family has a story. And I think sometimes when you come from an unhappy family and you know in your heart it's unhappy, it has nothing to do with faithfulness, or maybe it does, but you don't know that anybody else is as unhappy as you are. And so there's the myth. I'm going to marry, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to hear that lovely cello sound, you know, that resonant cello. And oh, William, you weren't that man. And I don't know, I guess it begs the second question. Does anybody ever really get over their first love? That love that was so compelling that they had. I don't mean a crush or a hookup. I mean that love, and that big reveal at the end when we find out his mother and the story she had made of their life was just this whole myth anyways, you know. She was not a great person. She was not the person you wanted to emulate. She was none of those things.
Right, she
And,
abandoned her daughter.
huh?
She abandoned her daughter.
Yep. She abandoned her daughter. She abandoned William, in effect.
Yeah.
And so everything was a myth. And I thought the reveal was, you know, like,
Right.
people make up the situations they want in life.
Yeah, thank you, Tamar. We'll take two last comments on this, and then I want to move on to the next vignette. Jim Manukin, and then Steve Bookbinder, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Sorry. I mean, you mentioned that now, but I guess it was it William's mother who left? So it was
Yes.
William's mother. So
Correct.
I misstated this, but in some sense, when Lucy heard the cello player, she fell in love. Now, she didn't leave her first husband; she had already left William. But it was a similar sort of recreation of the story she had heard about William, which is interesting. But I thought the message for this book for me was how it's hard enough to know yourself, and it's impossible to really know someone else.
Right, including your spouse.
Yes, no,
Right.
yes, including your spouse.
Including your spouse, right?
That's right.
We are mysteries to ourselves, and we are certainly mysteries
And that,
to our life partner.
yes, and and that's a powerful message.
That is a powerful message. Yeah, absolutely. Steve Bookbinder, last comment here, and then we'll move on to the next vignette.
Well, I don't think of upbringings as being bad or good. I think some are complicated and some are less complicated. And I had complicated parents. I also fell in love with someone when I was 20. That was a powerful relationship that ended before I married my wife, who I've been with for 47 years. So I think that to use Faulkner's words, the past is never past. And they are both aging. He is really aging. And he faces what we've sort of talked about, the dilemma of he's despairing in a lot of ways. And she's always felt they've had a relationship that's been based on some of the earlier incidences of despair. So I find it to be a very moving book. I don't necessarily have to, and the things that she talks about always feeling lonely in certain situations, that, feeling invisible. Some people don't feel those things, and some people do. And they're never able to completely escape the way that they were raised. But the gift of a complex relationship with your parents, the gift of having been involved in, let's say, failed romances, is it gives you insight into other things. She's had a complicated life and she can write that way. And you know, how many of us have not had a spouse who one day said to us, "Oh, Steve,"
Thank you, Steve.
you know, and that's the past, and that's what we live with, and that's what we try to go forward with. And I think that in the end, they're going to go on vacation together because they need each other in some ways.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's so thank you, Steve. That tees up the question, right? He wants to go to the Grand Caymans, and she says, "Let me think about it." And then this is in many ways, well, this is in fact the climax of the book. And it's very powerful. I just want to read part of it. Here's my question that I want to tee up. In the climax of the book, when she's deliberating, should she go to the Grand Caymans with William, she realizes that all this, he's my home and I'm snug and I'm safe with him, is all a myth. And then in the same breath, she says, I want to protect him from that insight and I want to protect myself from that insight. And she decides to go on vacation with him to Cayman Islands. So the question is why? Why does she choose to do that? So Caitlin, if you can please put on page 3 on the screen share. And I just, I thought to me, this was the kind of the key of the book. As I lay in bed that night, thinking of William and his face in my apartment of our conversation, all of a sudden I thought, oh, he has lost his authority. It made me sit up. It made me get out of bed and walk around the apartment. But he had lost his authority because of a mustache? Maybe. How did I know? I remembered this then. A few years after I left William, I was with a man who lived across the street from a museum in Manhattan. The man loved me. He wanted to marry me. He was the man who took me to the Philharmonic, but I did not want to marry him. He was a good man, but he made me anxious. And what I remembered was this. Always across the street was the tower of the museum. Every night I was there, maybe 3 times a week, a light was on in this small tower. And I always imagined a person working there late. I pictured a man, youngish or middle-aged, or sometimes a woman, so interested in the work that he or she had to stay there late. And I was always moved by the loneliness the person must be feeling as he or she worked alone in the lighted tower of this museum. The comfort I took night after night as I looked at those lighted windows of the tower of that museum, I felt so comforted to think of this lonely person working there all night. And only years later did I realize that I had never not seen the light, etc. And then only many years later did I realize I had been sustained by a myth. There was no one in that tower during those times, but I never got rid of it in my memory. The comfort that I had taken those many, many nights of my life when I had left my husband and I was very frightened and I saw the light on as I lay next to the sleeping man who loved me, but who always made me nervous. And the light in the tower had helped me through, but the light had not been what I thought it was. And then she says, and that was my story with William. I could not believe this. It was a huge wave that poured over me. William was like the light in the museum, only I had lived my life thinking it was worth something. Then I thought it was worth something. Skipping down, and then I thought, okay, I will do whatever I can to pretend this has not happened. I wanted to protect William from this understanding that I just had, and I wanted to protect myself from it as well. Yes, that would be true, but I am saying as honestly as I can, I did not want William to sense on any level that he had lost this with me. And then there's the Hansel and Gretel business, and then just on the next page 6, she writes, as the sun began to come up, I texted William, okay, I'll come. And he texted back immediately, thank you, button, then I fell asleep. Okay, thank you, Caitlin. If you can go back to screen share, the full screen. Why does she, that is just so, to me, that must be the linchpin of the book. She realizes it was a myth. And in the same breath, she realizes she doesn't want to, she wants to protect herself from that insight. She wants to protect him from that insight. and she goes to the Cayman Islands. What is going on in this climactic scene? Please explain. Any takers? Any takers? Nancy, thank you. And Nancy and then Judy.
So, first of all, I have a different read on this than
Please.
the others. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. First of all, I don't agree with Michael Gardner. I don't think most people, when they're 20 years old, find this person and say, I'm in love and I'm going to marry you and stay married. It's a lovely thing to say, but it's, in my opinion, so far from reality for women. Maybe that's what men do. I really don't know, but I don't know a lot of women that I personally know that would say that that's the case. Secondly, I think they both still love each other. I think William was a critical part of her. She is a successful novelist. And the reason, in my opinion, she got to be successful is because she had a very stable relationship with a very good man. The fact that he had affairs, I hate to say this, I'm going to blame on her. I'm not going to blame on him. For some reason, she wasn't available. And she kept saying, well, he's not available. What does that mean if he's out having affairs? Somehow or other, this woman wasn't interacting with him enough to keep him engaged. So, and I think she knew that. And so I guess for myself, I think the love affair goes on and it's within the constraints, of who they both are.
Thank you, Nancy. Judy Taub and then Joni Katz after Judy. Judy, if you can unmute.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute. Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Judy, now you're okay. Now you're unmuted.
Yeah, okay. I think in the end, after all was said and done, she sort of figured, myth or no myth, she enjoyed being with him. They're both aging. They're both alone. They enjoy being together. What the heck? Why hold back? Why not just go and, enjoy her life?
So
Enjoy
Judy,
your time
your
with
read
him.
is it's better. So it's better than loneliness.
Absolutely.
Okay, and you think it's like staving off loneliness. It'd be fun to be on a vacation on a hot climate with this guy that I've known for years. Whatever. It was a myth. It wasn't true, but it's a good
So
week of.
So what?
So what? Okay, Joni Katz.
Yeah. Hi. I agree with some of the things people have said and disagree with others. I think the climax of the book was when they were in Maine at the home of his sister, William's sister, and she did not ask William to come meet his sister. He might have done that, and I think that tells a little bit about that's the thing that bothered me most about the story. He did this whole trip to go to Maine, and then they never he never met his sister.
Well,
But
his sister didn't want to see him, right, Joni?
I know, but I think
His sister didn't want to see him.
she could have prevailed upon. I think she could have prevailed that, and I think it would have been a little closer. But I also thought, I agree with Nancy that I think that she loved him throughout the life. She laughed with him. Laughter is really important, and she had tremendous self-confidence. Forget about her parenting. Along the way, she met people in her life that mentored her and gave her the confidence to feel that she was good. And then she proved it in her writing. Maybe William contributed to her being more confident. Maybe he didn't. It could have been the teachers, the people she met at this very exclusive school that they never even said the name of. It's not important, but and then she became an accomplished writer. And he had these dalliances. He's the one that had the more trouble life. Because she kept the relationship with her mother, even though it was abusive, but she knew what her mother was. She didn't have to deal. She sort of came to terms with that.
Right.
And I think she was more comfortable in her own skin than he was.
So one of the themes that Joni and also Nancy articulated, I just want to explore this before I get to Risa Korn for the next comment, is that she really loved him. Myth or no myth, she loved him, she enjoyed his company, etc. So I wanted to ask this question. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I should get out into the world more. I would think that cheating on your spouse is kind of a deal breaker. That trust is very precious, and that when trust is broken, it's impossible to restore, and that kind of shatters relationships. Am I just hopelessly naive? Could someone speak to that? Because you just have relationships filled with cheating. How then do you have a relationship filled with lifelong love? Nancy, I'll go back to you because you're the one to bring this up.
She played a role in this, Wes, from my perspective, and she knew that. She wasn't there in some ways for him. And she knew that, whatever that means. So,
Okay, but can I just engage that, Nancy? Because I was, you have that. So let's say she wasn't there for him. Okay, now we don't, of course, we're not there in their marriage. Nobody's in the marriage but the people in the marriage. But it feels to me like cheating is a pretty deplorable way to go about it. It would seem to me that if your spouse isn't there for you, you say to your spouse, hey, I really feel not seen. I feel like you're not there. They work at it. That's why God created therapists. They go to a marriage counselor. Like, there's a way to do that with integrity. But just cheating on somebody feels like a non-integrity move. Am I off here?
again, from my perspective, she had a very successful life as a writer, and she knew that. And so she was filling her life with those kinds of things at some level, perhaps, and she knew this. She knew she didn't maybe have the depth because of the lack of love when she was little, to maybe love him in the way he needed to be loved. And maybe he knew that. And so she knew what her part was, and he knew. I'm not saying he was right in doing it. I'm just justifying her staying in the marriage for a while, then leaving, because now, Wes, I think they're in love again. I think the two of them, I was expecting them to, say, we'll live together again. I mean, it was just the way they interacted was very interesting to me.
Okay, Risa Korn, love your comments.
Yeah, I was really struck throughout the book about the intertwining themes of abandonment and emptiness. And I think that, the scene that Wes, you mentioned in terms of her riding in the back seat with David and his sister in the front seat through the darkness and the abandonment, abandoned buildings, et cetera. I think that was also echoed in their trip to revisit the scenes in Germany from his father's life and the scenes when they went to find his sister.
Right.
And I think that in some way that sort of recurring abandonment that occurred in her life, and also perhaps somewhat in the other main characters, and particularly the male characters' lives, may be why she was able to tolerate, the infidelities and kept coming back to him, because there was something comforting and comfortable about him over, many years in many relationships. And he was the familiar, although there was this myth and story that she had constructed. So I sort of felt that was kind of the unifying theme of the book. Even at the very end, when she kind of abandons her, her myth of him, but yet she's able to sort of make another construct. And I think part of that may, in fact, be related to their, their backgrounds and their upbringings. And in William's case, it was more somewhat in the shadows, but in her case and in the case of David's background, it was very defining in terms of their lives.
Thank you, Risa. Just on that theme of abandonment, could you say a word about that very brief scene, but kind of evocative? She's having, brunch with her grown daughters, and they're kind of angry, did dad cheat on you? And they're kind of exercised about that. And then then they asked, and she volunteers that she cheated on him, and they seemed to not respond or not get exercised about that. What was your read of that scene when the daughters were kind of not very reactive to the fact that their mother was also cheating?
I was surprised by that. I actually expected them to be angrier, but I think that throughout the book, they recognize her as someone who's had losses and has been somewhat victimized. You know, she lost her husband, David.
Right.
She came, you know, as she was reminded by William's mother over and over again from nothing.
Right.
You know, so I think that they were more solicitous of her in general
Right.
than they were of their father.
Great, thank you, Lisa. I want to make 2 more comments on this this issue vignette, and then I'm going to move to her falling in love with David, just for the contrast that it yields. Brenda Krause and then Roxanne Kelber. Brenda?
Yes, just unmuting. So the way I really saw this book and the playing out of the characters of Lucy and William is that both of them were deeply traumatized as a result of their childhoods. And in fact, even I was thinking about unconsciously for both of them, perhaps that's what attracted them to one another. They both shared deep trauma in their childhoods. And I saw that the traumatic events permeated everything that played out in their relationship. Lucy had great difficulty asserting herself with William, especially early on in the relationship, and she often protected him, I think, and had trouble finding her own voice to really express disagreement, and she would acquiesce to him. Both of them also had coping mechanisms. Lucy had her mother, she called it her made-up mother, that she would talk to in moments when she wanted to be consoled. And I mean, also William, in his tremendous abandonment that happened to him when he was a young child by not being carried any longer by the nursery school teacher, just tremendous abandonment and loss. And I just saw this as permeating everything. And, you know, in terms of holding on to the myth, I think a lot of people have spoken to this, that somehow they found comfort. And, you know, I think Lucy she was able to really do a lot of self-observation and understood this, but she also was not, I think, strong enough to be able to say she wanted to live without William.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. Let me have one more comment on this from Roxanne Kelber on this line of thought.
Sure, thank you. You had asked, you know, what is she protecting William from? And I thought, well, her realization that he's lost his sense of himself, that's his authority. He's lost who he thought he was. So he's kind of lost his own myth. And as she's coming to terms with what he represented to her, which somehow was really not solid and not so real, to protect him, she doesn't want him to undermine him and damage him more than he's already damaged and hurt. She's really not vindictive. And she doesn't really want to let go of the good it did for her to hold on to the myth, because she will have to rework in her head everything about what the marriage meant. And I thought, going back to the first conversation about myth, that maybe some of the point of this theme throughout is sometimes it's, I mean, we can always question, like, what is the reality? It depends what dimension of something you're looking at. But maybe what we believe is at least as important, if not more important, than what really is, because that's what really affects us.
Note to file, That applies to the entire Torah, right? You know, the question is not, did it actually happen? The question is, what's the power of the myth? And how does that myth affect your life and imbue it with meaning, even if it never actually happened that way? And maybe there's that kind of a creative tension there. I want to just, in the interest of time, add now the comparison or the contrast, which is her falling in love with David, and what it says in its own right, and how it fits into the broader context of the story. So, Caitlin, if you can please screen share pages 8 and 9. I had gone to the Philharmonic for 3 or 4 years with someone I had been seeing, and I had noticed the man who played the cello because he was slow to get to the stage. He had a bad hip from a childhood accident, I found out later. And he was a short man and just slightly overweight. And when he came onto the stage, you left it because I would sometimes stay to watch him leave. He always walked very slowly and unevenly, and he looked older than he was. He had gray hair around a small bald spot. And he played the cello beautifully. When I first heard him play Chopin's Etude in C sharp minor, I thought, this is all I want, except I do not know that I even had that thought. I just mean there was nothing else in the world I wanted except to listen to him play. After I was through with the man I had been seeing, I went to the Philharmonic on my own twice, and I went home after the second time and Googled the cello player. And it took me a while, but I found his name, David Abramson, and I did not know if there was a wife. There was almost nothing about him at all, except that he played for the Philharmonic. The third time I went by myself, I suddenly thought as it ended, and as I watched him walk off the stage, I will go to him. So I found the stage door that he would come through, and he did come through it. It was October, not that chilly. And as he walked out, I went up to him and I said, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my name is Lucy and I love you." I could not believe that I had said that. And I said, "Oh, I mean, I love your music." And the poor man stood there. He was almost my height, which is not tall. And he said, "Well, thank you." And he started to move away. And I said, "No, I'm so sorry. That sounded crazy. I just meant I've loved your music for a few years now." And the man stood there beneath the light of the doorway and he looked at me. I could see him looking at me. And he finally said, "What did you say your name was?" So I told him again. And he said, "Well, Lucy, would you like to have a drink or coffee or a bit of food, whatever your choice would be?" Later, he said it seemed almost providential. We married 6 weeks after that. So, Caitlin, if we can come back. So I just want to draw out the obvious that Lucy describes him in such unappealing ways. He walks slow, he's short, he's overweight, he's both graying and bald, right? And yet she's drawn to him. What sense do you make of this? And how does it fit in to the broader context of the story? And I'd love to call on everybody who wanted to speak at least once, that you should be able to speak, and then I'll call on other folks who've already shared. So anyone who has not yet shared, who would like to offer their words, please put that in the chat, and I'd love to call on you. I'll go back to Lori Pollinger and then Steve Bookbinder after Lori. And again, anyone who wants to share, please, put your willingness to share in the chat. Lori.
Well, I was going to comment more on the relationship with William, not with David.
Okay. Well, what would you like to say about that?
Well, I don't think we're talking about these relationships more in black and white terms. It was good, it was bad. And to go back to what I initially said, relationships are very complex. And I'm thinking, I'm a social worker by training, and I'm thinking about a course that I took in my 20s with Salvador Minuchin, a very famous couples therapist. And I sat there and he said, during the course of a marriage, people get divorced several times. I had no idea what he was talking about. I was probably 24, 25. And what he meant by that is that people change and grow, shit happens, people grow apart, people come back together. It's another relationship. And I think that that relationships are very complicated and that these people, the couple, still really loved each other. And one of the things that was so impressive is that they were continuing to use these pet names, which are really part of your endearment that you have or you feel towards another person. And I think that, so yes, she could be, attracted to this new person, but there's also a stage in the beginning of a relationship, which is an idealized kind of romance.
Right.
There's actually been studies about the brain that show that. But I think the music was soothing. And it just seemed like this was going to be, it felt comforting to her.
Thank you, Lori. Steve, you were going to add, and I'm curious about William, and I'm also curious about the David contrast. It's just so clear.
Well, years ago, I may have said to my wife, we had seen somebody who was a short, not very attractive guy with a very attractive woman. And I said, wow, that's an odd couple. And she said, that's just because you don't know anything about them. And men, all they think about is what the person looks like. Women are attracted to men for very different reasons. I think she's attracted to David almost intuitively. She knows David ain't going to cheat on her. And in fact, we have no evidence that he does. The interesting thing about this book as well, from my perspective, is that we don't have any male perspective, really. We don't know anything about what goes on in William's head. We don't know why he has affairs or what he gets out of those affairs. And we don't know anything about the physical attraction dimension and all of what goes into the complexity of a relationship. We just have it. Excuse me. We just have that from his perspective. But I think she sees David and she sees an alternative to William, and she likes that alternative, and she likes the routine of the raspberries. And yet at the same time, the past is never past. She was in love with William. He did incredible things for her. And, that's why when David goes, hey, it's comfortable to go back to going to the Caymans with William, because that's what I have right now as I age. And it'll be interesting, what's left is, will William still, he'll still be the womanizer he always was, or will he change? But I just think the whole thing with David is just so perfect in the sense of, it isn't just attraction to the physical. She's looking at this guy and saying, he makes beautiful music. Right. We can have a better life together.
Forgive one annoying question. It's just a Nujnik rabbi annoying question, but whatever, it's the synagogue Zoom. What do you make of the fact that David is Jewish? I mean, it feels like a conspicuous fact. There's the Hasidic thing, he's Jewish, etc. What's the relevance, the resonance?
The Jews are in touch with their feelings. The Jews have some feelings. William is completely, God, he's like, he can't communicate at all. And, I just wonder if, one of the interesting things is over my life in different sort of scenes, I've known people who've had affairs and they kept it quiet.
Right.
Who is William is what we're left with. But David is the sensitive Jew. You always hear that. I was involved with a Gentile woman for a while.
Thank you.
Portnoy's complaint.
Any other voices on Lucy, on William, on David before we close up? And any other voices, new or old, happy to entertain them. Jim Mnookin. Jim, you're still on mute. Now you're good.
Okay. I have trouble with Nancy Levy's blaming this, the affairs all on Lucy. And I think that's, it takes two to tango or not tango. And he may have had other needs. He may, it clearly sounded as if he had troubles with his second and third marriage.
Right.
So, I'm troubled. I'm troubled by that. But and, you know, who knows what she was? I mean, she was looking for something different with when she introduced herself to David, et cetera. But you know, the I found it a very interesting and thoughtful book, and I thought I really enjoyed the complexities about relationships and understanding them and understanding yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Barbara Resnick?
I think I'm on mute. I just feel it's maybe simplistic. We forget about aging and change and relationships. And here was a woman who had this more young relationship with this wonderful man. And then over time, she got divorced and he went on his way. She sees him in different roles, but she comes back to him and she loves what she loved with him before. And they're comfortable with each other. They really don't want to remarry each other, but they're just comfortable. And David is such a different person. And I think the Jewish context is almost different. She doesn't raise it, but it's got to be so different for Lucy. I mean, most people have not known Jews in the Christian world. And here's a totally foreign experience that she's able to assume, you know, just to eat up anyway and apparently manage somewhat, although she found it darker in the car. So I think there's something about judgment. I feel as we grow older, we learn you can't judge people so quick too. That in the end, sometimes it has nothing to do with you or anything else you think that it does. It has something totally do with other things. And you start to accept the world, I think, a little better. So you can feel sentimental about the father of your children.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, that leads to my last question for you, which is the title. Oh, William. What is the meaning of that title? And how does that title serve the larger points she wants to make in that book? Any takers? Okay, and if you want to speak again and haven't been called on, let me know. Chaya Bekefi.
I think there is a very clear difference between Lucy and William. She continuously tries to understand and to make sense of things and to find some kind of a synthesis. William keeps disappointing or coming up short. It's almost saying, oh, here you go again. You didn't get it. You missed the point. And it looks like he's so uncurious about himself or the things around him. And when the comment was made about Lucy being responsible for his transgression, he has never shown a real interest in what Lucy's needs are, except for giving her class and giving her some financial stability. But it was his scientific success, his relationship with his students. So he's kind of obtuse from early on, and maybe he needed to distance himself and to disconnect from his pain, and this was his defense mechanism. But it went into his Septuaginta. He was in his 70s and he was still clueless about himself and incurious.
Yeah.
Which is such a contrast to Lucy, who keeps trying to understand, to make sense.
Thank you, Chaya. I wanna end the class with the last page of the book, which actually frontally, directly addresses the O. William title, and I think reinforces the main point that some of us have already talked about. So, Caitlin, if you can go to page 7 of the handout. This is the end of the book. And this is after she's decided, you know, the myth has been punctured, but she's not gonna deal with the myth. She's gonna go to the Grand Caymans with William. And she writes, at one point I sat on the bed and said out loud, oh, Catherine. And then I thought, oh, William. But when I think, oh, William, don't I mean, oh, Lucy too? Don't I mean, oh, everyone, oh, dear, everybody in this whole wide world. We do not know anybody, not even ourselves. And first of all, I just want to editorial comment. I just think that is truth. We do not know anybody, even ourselves, except a little tiny bit we do, but we are all mythologies, mysterious. We are all mysteries is what I mean. This may be the only thing in the world I know to be true. Now, thank you, Caitlin. If you can come back, here is my last question. Just a technical, this is like a Rashi on Elizabeth Strout. Here's a Rashi on Elizabeth Strout. In the penultimate line, I mean, the main point we all get, we're mysteries to ourselves and to others. Here's my Rashi. Why the penultimate line, but we are all mythologies, mysterious. We are all mysteries is what I mean. What's with that? Why can't she just say, but we are all mysteries? This may be the only thing in the world I know to be true, but she fumbles and adds and mythologies, mysterious, we are all mysteries is what I mean. What is that? That's my last question for the class. What's the resonance of that little seeming repetition? She can't quite get it right. Any takers on that? So I'll just close with this idea. I mean, I think it's a case where form and substance converge. To me, this whole book is about nothing is easy and nothing is smooth. Nothing is easy and nothing is smooth. And everything is characterized by uncertainty. The person that you're with, you don't really know, you don't know yourself. Nothing is easy, nothing is smooth. And even at the very end, when she wants to say that we're mysteries, it's not easy and it's not smooth. It's a case where the form and the substance reinforce each other. The art and the message of the art reinforce each other. She's trying to say we're all mysteries, and it takes her so many words to say that. So I want to just end by saying I love this book because I think that central message of the irreducible mystery of who we are, who our loved ones are, let alone people beyond our immediate circle. Like, who really knows what anybody is or who anybody is? And then the question that I leave you with is, if that is true, if we're all mysteries to ourselves, and if we are all mysteries to the people that we love, including our loved one, including our spouse, let alone our children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then what follows in how we live our lives? How do you live life in the face of all that mystery? Thank you for this conversation, guys. And I really appreciated it. Have a wonderful night.